And now, the moment you've all been waiting for. It's time for Office Hours with Dr. Duke and me, Katie. So we decided, after all these questions that we get online a lot, like how can we respond to them, let's just, do a little Q&A, if you will. And we're calling it Office Hours because you're a professor and you really don't get anyone coming to your office hours. So this is basically your opportunity to make up for all the questions you don't receive.
Little office hour trivia here. I've decided to have my office hours over in the cafe, a big cafe on campus, because I will not be in an office alone with an individual student because it's too easy for them to accuse you of things. I have mine, as you well know, I have my office in a cafe right next to the bathroom where people are flushing constantly so that no one can accuse me of anything without multiple witnesses.
All right, well, let's get this rolling. We have a lot of questions. We're going to see how many we can get to in the short amount of time we have. So we're going to kick off with Michelle from Smyrna, Tennessee. She says, "Dear Dr. Duke and Katie, I would love to hear about how you met and ended up working together." Well, you're implying we work together. That doesn't, okay. Also, who are your favorite authors?
Well, to start, I teach Shakespeare routinely. And Shakespeare is the one class I teach. In Wisconsin, high school teachers are required to teach Shakespeare in their high school classrooms, which means as part of their education degree, English majors who want to teach high school have to take a course in Shakespeare. That's where I encounter education majors every semester. And they're pretty bleak lot a lot of the time. They're highly politicized. They don't know very much. We mentioned in an earlier segment that many of the education majors were kids who sort of failed at other aspects of the curriculum. But I had this one kid in class, and she wasn't a kid, she was a little bit older. She was about 4 foot tall, and all I could see above her desk chair was her chin, right? But every time I said something sarcastic, which is to say pretty much every hour of every class, she's one of the few people who got the sarcasm. So I found that interesting. And the more I read her journals and her work, the more I recognized that we had a kindred spirit here, not just somebody who understood what was happening to education and what was wrong with it, but somebody else who also understood that the whole premise underneath it, the political premise of education, was a disaster. And so we got to know each other pretty well that way. And by the time she had graduated, I figured she would be a perfect person to bring on board here at Freedom Project. Pay her a little bit of money, milk her for all she's worth.
Pretty much.
Right? And she's turned out to be Katie Petrick.
Oh, that was like the nicest thing you've ever said.
Yeah, sarcasm.
Here's my side of the story, which has plenty of sarcasm. So I knew I had to take Shakespeare. And I decided to do it in my final semester before student teaching because I was like, I don't want to take Shakespeare. Like I had it in high school and it was great and all, but at the college level, I figured the professor was going to be some way out there person. So I had heard stories about this professor. Yeah, the guy who teaches it, he yells a lot, but he says some funny things. I said, okay, fine, I'll take it. Day one of class, you come in, and I don't even remember what you were talking about specifically, but it was something sarcastic, and I was like, this is going to be amazing. So it turned out to be it was the best class I had taken, obviously, at UW Oshkosh, because let's be honest, all of the classes were awful. But then I did a little research because I needed to come up with a topic to write about for my education class, and I saw that you were involved with Common Core, and that's how I first started looking more into Freedom Project, and I was like, this is actually where I want to be. I don't need to go to a public school anymore. This is where I want to be. So that's how we ended up.
And your favorite authors?
Well, Shakespeare now, I guess I could put in there. From my childhood, though, R.L. Stine, does he count from Goosebumps? But no, authors I repeatedly read most of their stuff now. C.S. Lewis, I'm trying to get through as much of him as I can. Shakespeare, obviously I want to read all of his plays, but there's plenty. And the sonnets if I want to get with all of those. So I'll say those two.
And my favorites besides Shakespeare, who I teach for a living, would be Fyodor Dostoevsky, the great Russian novelist, who actually is, in my mind, one of the probably the single greatest defender of intellectual defender of Christianity in the last 150 years. Probably the single biggest, even bigger than C.S. Lewis, perhaps, the single biggest, most important philosophical voice in intellectually defending Christianity and the Christian tradition.
Okay, so just because people probably want to know, if they want to start with the Dostoevsky, Crime and Punishment, do you start Brothers Karamazov? Where do you start?
If you want to read Dostoevsky, the Russians are never easy. I would start with a short story called The Dream of a Ridiculous Man, which will give you a short 20-page introduction into that kind of philosophical novel. And then I go to Crime and Punishment, and then The Brothers Karamazov.
It's a good one.
Which I think is the greatest novel ever written.
And obviously you have a special place in your heart for Dostoevsky, because what are your dogs' names?
Yes, we've got 4 dogs. And there's Nastasia, and there's Tatiana, and there's Mishkin, and there's Pushkin. And they are all named for characters in Dostoevsky novels or Russian authors.
All right, so Aaron from Oconto Falls, Wisconsin wants to know, what is your favorite Democrat nonsense phrase?
Speaking truth to power. That's the one that gets me every time. It's so woke and it's so courageous. To see how brave we are. We're in America where no one gets arrested for what they think and no one gets arrested for what they say. And yet these liberals are acting like when Code Pink shook their fist at George W. Bush and said, "We don't approve of your war," that was some kind of a major thing. Tell you what, speaking truth to power is standing down tanks in Tiananmen Square. Speaking truth to power is something you know nothing about, progressives in America. You seldom teach the truth. You don't believe in truth. And whenever you have power, you use your truth to run over other people. So that's the one that gets me. Speaking truth to power.
They literally do that. I want to claim them to have literally as everything they say. Like the world is literally going to end in 12 years.
There are literal concentration camps on the border. Literal.
But mine is actually going back to $15 an hour. Where do they just pull? They pull numbers out wherever they feel like, because math isn't a real concept to them. It's also racist and sexist and all those other things.
Economics is
not economics altogether. So I'm going to go with $15 an hour because poof, that's the magic number. All right, Alexander from Concord, North Carolina. He asked, why are administrators so scared of social justice students and groups? The outrage culture is so rampant that one controversy is present one week but is gone by the next week. Do they think these students make a majority of the student population and that these controversies will not go away if they resist? I'm a university student, and this is what I've seen on campus, that controversies always go away.
Alexander, you make a really good point, and I think you're exactly right, that the number of angry social justice warriors on campus is less than 20%, maybe 15%. Yet they get all the attention, they get all the money, they get all the power, because those kids are arguing from radical progressive positions. You're absolutely right about that. But the question that you ask, why are administrators, school administrators, so cowed by this small handful of students? It's because almost every single school administrator was once a faculty member. The deans and the chancellors and the provosts and the vice chancellors, they all are professors who get promoted, which means they are even as left-wing or more left-wing than the 15%. The professoriate has gone full in on social justice. That's why they cater to the 15%. So it's not that you have a bunch of administrators who don't agree with the politics of the radicals. They are the radicals. And so that's why they're more than willing to give 15% a megaphone while taking 85% of relatively apolitical kids or conservative kids and ignoring them entirely.
Yeah, if you want to do a good sociology project, that would probably fail you, Alexander, but just do it anyway. Go interview all your professors and administrators. Ask them if they've had a job outside of the university ever before, unless they were 16. But ever, once they got into college, if they have ever done anything outside. And the results probably aren't that shocking, but they speak truth to power.
It's the definition of the bubble, isn't it?
It is the bubble. All right. Henry asks, from Palmero, California, Henry asks, where did the love of Shakespeare come from?
I was, I believe, the first person in my immediate family to ever go to college. And as such, that as often happens with first-generation kids going to college, they tend to go all the way, right? And I loved learning about things. When I got to college, I was taking all these different courses on Roman history, Renaissance painting, courses on medieval culture and history. And I just sort of fell in love with the ideas about it. And I asked myself, all right, I realize that if you're going to be a professor, you don't get to major in everything. Right? You can't be a professor of everything and teach Roman history one day and then teach medieval church history the next day and teach French politics. And they couldn't do that. Had to pick one area to study. And I asked myself, what's the one thing that would get boring the least? Who spoke to me about the human condition in a deeper, more lasting way than anybody else? Who, if I had to teach him for the next 30 years, would never bore me? And Shakespeare is the answer. And I've been teaching Shakespeare for 25 years, and he still does not bore. He does not not disappoint. His insights are scary and they're still profound. And the thing about Shakespeare is every 10 years you go back and read them, and I've noticed this, I've been reading Shakespeare for 40 years now. Every 10 years you go back and read them, and your own change of life circumstance makes you understand more things that you didn't understand. So when you read A Midsummer Night's Dream when you're in high school, you think it's wonderful and pretty and cute, and it's got some sweet poetry moments. When you read A Midsummer Night's Dream when you're in your 50s, you have a much greater perspective to understand what Shakespeare was trying to tell us about how ephemeral life and love is.
Well, with King Lear, I think I'm anticipating, when I read King Lear, I had anticipated, thinking about, life and death and growing old and what that means and looking to the next generation, and that I'm wondering 20 years from now how I'm going to feel. That's going to be even more heartfelt. But obviously my love of Shakespeare came from your class. Moving on. Nancy from Cincinnati, Ohio wants to know, what is your favorite method of camping? And Nancy was kind enough to give us some options. Roughing it with a sleeping bag and a prayer. Roughing it but in a tent with 99% humidity. Camping in a pop-up, which is a tent-like experience but off the ground. Are you glamping in a trailer with a toilet and other luxuries of home? Or are you motorhome camping, where the cost of fuel, maintenance, and the rig itself will deplete your hard-earned savings within the first 2 years, but will create beautiful memories? Nancy, great question.
Nancy, I hate to disappoint you, and don't hate me for what I'm about to say.
I'm going to hate you.
But the only fresh wood I want to be around is the panel in a library, the paneling. The only pine smell I want comes from a cardboard air freshener in my air-conditioned automobile. And the only crashing of white-capped water I want to see is the flush of my in-house toilet. I have no interest in camping. I've never been camping. I don't want to camp. As Sheldon Cooper said in The Big Bang Theory, if outside is so good, why has mankind spent 10,000 years perfecting inside? I don't want to be outside other than to walk back and forth to my car.
And even that, you take the closest parking spot there is.
And if I could get out of my car and hop on a moped to drive to the building,
I'd like to see that
I
happen.
would do that. I love nature in the abstract. Give me in my library a window that allows me to look out on bushes and stuff. That's it. And that also applies to yard work. The one luxury I afford myself, right? I don't have a lot of elaborate hobbies. I don't drink, not for moral reasons. I just don't like it. I don't drink. I don't party. I don't play sports. I don't go fishing. My perk is I pay somebody else to cut the grass and shovel the snow, so I don't have to be out there in it.
Nancy, I will answer your question because unlike you, I go outside. I grew up in the pine trees, so I like going out into nature. Roughing it, but in a tent. I'm okay sleeping in a tent. I've done it many a time. Pretty much my house is the size of a tent anyway.
Yep,
so.
You've got a little tiny house. You dress like a hobo. So, I mean, being outdoors, right?
It works for me.
It's just natural for you.
All right, moving on. Hope from Fond du Lac, foot of the lake, Wisconsin, wants to know, what was the one story so far that stood out to you the most?
I can't pick any one story. I think to me the stories, because we keep doing them every week, that are the most shocking and the most, in some ways, inhumane, is we talked about it in an earlier question, this relative small minority of kids who are the social justice warriors. Well, think about the incredibly infinitesimally small number of kids who are actually transgendered or transsexual, and the ability that group has now to bully its way into every aspect of life and of education. How many, like these girls, right, are their freedoms and their opportunities are being compromised by this tiny, tiny, tiny minority. That's leftist culture, and to me, that's leftism in a nutshell, right? The loudest voices coming from the least representable people, getting most of what they want all the time at the expense of everybody else.
Yeah, trying to figure out just one story because we've had 70-some.
Who's copping out now?
Oh, I'm picking one.
You're picking one?
I'm starting
and
narrowing it down here. So to be able to pick one is difficult because we've had how many stories every single episode, and it just never ends. But instead of trying to pick one on the college kids themselves because they're just they've been trained up this way, or the children, I'm not going to pick the children. I'm going to pick the educators who are ruining their lives. So the one story that I remember was that principal in a Tennessee school who thought it would be a smart idea to have a funeral for a baby doll, which was supposed to represent their students' basically scores from the previous year. Like over half the school failed the math scores, like the math tests they had to take. And so that baby was supposed to represent like everything they're burying the stats or something like that. It was something about burying the old data and starting anew. And they thought it was a smart idea to actually have a funeral amongst the teachers on a Friday afternoon. And that was just quite representative of exactly what our administrators think is the way to go about education in America. Okay. Paula from Farmington, Maine says, my question to you guys is this. If we were to end up with a Democratic president, where do you see us as a country in 4 years? And she's speaking overall, not just within education. Do you think there's even a reverse button at this point?
Well, I think we have a rare moment of clarity in American politics where one of the two political parties is stopped pretending that they care. Right? The Democrat Party no longer pretends to be moderate and centrist and reasonable. They've gone full out bat crazy left, right? They've all told you they're socialists now. They've all claimed the mantle. They've told you that they want reproductive rights. They want mothers to be able to murder babies at any point in their pregnancy, including when they're giving birth. And if a baby survives an abortion, they want it to be starved to death. Every one of them. The Democrat Party has now said you cannot be pro-life and be a member of the Democrat Party. They have committed fully to open borders. Not one of them with Biden kind of, but now they're arguing whether or not it should even be a crime to cross borders illegally. Paula, we are at a point now where what they're telling you is what they will do. They are not pretending anymore. They can't go any farther left than they've already gone. So if a Democrat, one of this crop of Democrats wins, you know what you're going to get here. You're going to get confiscatory taxes, assuming the president has one or two houses of Congress, or they can make this work. What they want to do is what they're telling you they're going to do. And I don't think for the Democrat Party there is any reverse button now. There is no way. It doesn't matter how looming the cliff is. It doesn't matter how destructive it's going to be. They're going to keep charging farther and farther left.
Moving on, Ryan from small town Illinois. What advice would you give to public school administrators who are trying to get out of the public school system? It's hard when you're making a decent salary and have put in a number of years towards retirement.
Ryan, it's good that you know that the schools are corrupt. I'm a corrupt mess. I would never judge you or anybody else for sticking with it. I mean, as much as I despise university campuses, I stay a professor because it's missionary work. And so I guess what I would say to you is you shouldn't apologize for your career, and you shouldn't apologize for the fact that you have a career that's taking care of you and your family. You recognize the problem. I guess I would say to you is stay there. If that's what's best for you and your family and financially and the tenure that you've accrued there, stay there. But try to make small differences there. Better to make small differences there than to walk away from education altogether and do nothing. So I appreciate that, but don't feel guilty. I would, if I were you, what I try to do every day I'm on campus is do one thing to fight back against the progressive monolith. If you're doing one thing every day as a school administrator, to give one teacher a little more freedom to defend one student when she speaks her mind from the outrage mob, you're doing a lot, so keep doing it.
Okay, follow-up question, because we get this question a lot. What about I'm a teacher and I feel this is my mission in life. I want to teach. What advice could you give the teachers?
I say have thick skin, right? Recognize that if you're a traditional teacher who wants to do it the right way, you're going to meet nothing but resistance. Turn your classroom into a site of resistance. When you close your classroom door, there are certain things you're going to have to say, certain lessons you're going to have to follow that are garbage. But give kids the other side too. Take a moment quietly to show them the other side. Yeah, if you're look, I believe that if God made teachers, right? God made people with the gift of teaching. If that's your gift, pursue it and have faith that he'll find a way for you. He always does. Every time I get fired from a university, or get booted from a university or leave a university, going on 7 times now, I look at the good Lord and say, okay, time for me to do something else. And he always finds me another teaching job. So
it is biblical. It's in Romans. If it is to teach, then teach.
That's right.
So do it. All right. And finally, Mike from Pensacola, Florida wants to know, what is the most unique job you have ever had? Let's hear your story.
Well, I got a master's degree and a PhD, and I never took out any loans for that. Ooh. So to do that, though, I worked. When getting my master's degree, I worked about 50 hours a week as a bartender in a sleazy dive bar where I was the cook, the bartender, and believe it or not, the bouncer. You wouldn't know to look at me now, but when I was 20 years old, I weighed 160 pounds, had really curly hair.
Proof.
I'll have to bring in my freshman year of college
Proof.
student ID. I'll do that so you can see what I had really kinky, curly Italian hair, and I had it long, right? I weighed 160 pounds. I could bench press 320 pounds. I was a little Italian Goomba, all right? And I got in my share of fights. I've got scars on my knuckles from punching people in the face. And one of the reasons why I don't drink today is because for 4 years, to pay for my master's degree and part of my PhD, I watched people get drunk every night. And the nice thing was I didn't have to be a particularly good fighter. I fought mostly drunk people, right? So didn't take much, but I do have places where the teeth have sort of torn into my knuckles and the skin between my knuckles. So that, for me, if you can imagine me as a bouncer and a bartender in a sleazy dive bar. Anecdote?
Anecdote. Yeah.
Anecdote. This
Story
is
time.
anecdote time. I was, on a Saturday afternoon, I was bartending, and we had some Hells Angels guys that would come in, and they would hang out there, and they kind of liked me. They kind of jokingly adopted me. They called me college boy, right? And it was funny because these Hells Angels would sit at a table right in front of me, and they would literally fight about things, about World War II history. No, the Battle of the Bulge was this. And I thought it was amusing because these were guys named Spike, right? And they had big hair, and the shirts with the leather jackets with the sleeves cut off and the tattoos. And so I was teaching one day, and there was bartending, and there was a college basketball game on. And it was halftime, and one of the teams had a 30-point lead in a college basketball game. So I said, guys, I'm going to change this. This is ridiculous. Who wants to watch this? One of the Hells Angels says, no. Wait a second, college boy. He says, I'll make you a bet. So I'll make you a bet that the team that's losing comes back to win. And I'm thinking to myself, this is fantastic. All right, because 30 points is huge. And it was like a top 10 team versus a scrub team. So I said, you're on for a bet. At the end of the third quarter, the team that was winning by 30 points was still winning by like 29 points. And I started to mock the Hells Angels. And so the bet was he was going to pay me $100 if the team that was winning won. But if I lost, if the team came back, I had to get my ears pierced.
Looking at your ear
You know what
holes.
happened, right? You know what happened. In the fourth quarter, it was, I guess, the biggest comeback in NCAA history. I lost. The next morning, Sunday morning, I was picked up on the back of a motorcycle, and I was driven not to the piercing pagoda at the mall. I was taken to a head shop where they sell marijuana paraphernalia, and you could smell the marijuana they were smoking. Some guy named Zeke took me in the back room with a needle, not any kind of a piercing tool, but with an actual syringe needle, on which he poured Jack Daniel's whiskey
that's a good
to pierce my ear. You can still see the hole, right? And I got a dangly skull and crossbones earring in my ear that I had to wear for a month. And do you know what the kick in the pants was? The lead guy said to me, that game that we watched was played 2 weeks ago. You watched it on video, and they knew the outcome.
I was going to say, did they have the replay in the corner? Did it say replay?
I didn't even notice. No.
College boy.
So I wore it
College
for
boy.
a year. I looked kind of sexy, though.
Yeah,
long
right.
hair, a little Goomba with the earring. There's my anecdote.
And on that note, just want to take a minute to say thank you for all of your awesome questions that came in. I was overwhelmed by how many questions we had. It was really cool and fun to kind of pick through. Keep sending questions in. If you like, this little Q&A office hours, we'll do it again.
How about we shoot for an office hour section once a month? I would say if you have questions about your love life, questions about how to decorate your house,
How to get an ear pierced.
what it's like to live in a hobbit hole for Katie, ask us. We're here for you. We are here for you.